In preparing this course, I talked to a large number of financial planners, many of them certified, who spent their time, a great deal of time in many cases, working with charities. And I always asked, what was the biggest problems you had? And I expected things like client attitude towards charities, etc. And it turned out the biggest problem they had is dealing with state government. And it's kind of interesting, none of the textbooks covered it. My conversation with some of the charities didn't cover it, but it certainly showed up when I talked to the financial planners. I then checked with some CPAs who did a lot of charitable taxation, and they came out with the same thing. The states are the big problem. So I think what we've gone through in any course on charitable gifting is a lot of positive things and people really contributing a lot, but we do have the problem of how to deal with state governments, which seem to be, in many cases, enemies of charities is the best way of putting it. I hate to have that negativism, but I get that feeling from many of them. We're going to first of all discuss the various ways state and local governments affect the charitable gifting process, describe the financial planner's role in due diligence of state and local governments, and describe what state government released to the general public from the charitable organization's tax return. So let's get right into it. State laws are expanding in this area. Any state nexus in compliance for charitable gifting is an issue today due to the government use of technology. And government has been very big in expanding the release and publication of information received from charities. We also see that there's a great deal of variety between what various states do as far as their relationships and regulations and laws dealing with charitable gifting. State laws, however, we can say are, as a general rule, expanding their application of their regulations and rules to charities, and the charities are subject to some very large penalties for non-compliance. And I'm not sure why the charity non-compliance is so much greater than anybody else, other than perhaps the charities have, in the past, tend not to pay a lot of attention to the state laws and concentrate on the federal laws. What's the government interest in charities? Well, I'm going to give you some information here that I received. They want, first of all, ensure organizational assets are used for intended purposes. Now, the federal government does that. The states also do it. So if you're a large charity that's in 50 states, you've got 51 government agencies or more that are observing what you're doing, and not sure any value's added, but it does provide jobs for people at the state agencies and local agencies to do what everybody else is doing on the same charity. Protect residents from fraudulent solicitations, and that's well understood. However, I think that when we talk about qualified charities, the charities that are recognized by the IRS, there should not really be a big concern about fraudulent solicitations there. There are fees imposed by states on not-for-profits, which is a surprise to some people. In fact, some of the fees in some of the states are very large. And unrelated to tax-exempt purpose income is taxed. That's also true by the federal government, but the states have a much broader interpretation, apparently, in many cases, as to what is property that's unrelated. Again, that's a definitional term. Party seeking information on charities that you're going to run into, and this is becoming more each year. First of all, the taxing authorities of the state and local jurisdictions. I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist or an Einstein to understand states and local governments are desperate for getting money and to do the things they want to do, and charities become just another taxing entity to them. We also have a lot of information wanted by foundations and various potential donors, not doors, but donors. There's researchers and watchdog groups that look into charities, legislatures at more and more states, and local level politicians looking into charities. News media is always watching them. And then we have state agencies being set up with the specific purpose of keeping track of the charities. What federal law requires charities to provide the states, and this is kind of interesting. Charities have to use the 990 PF form that goes to the attorney generals of each of the states that they're doing business in. And besides where they're doing business in is where their principal office is located, where any organization was created, such as a trust or any incorporation is done. Any state the organization reports to state concerning the organization's assets or activities, and any state where the organization is registered or holds property in the state. They get copies of the 990 PF, which is, again, most of it is available on the internet for anyone to take a look at the tax returns, but there's information that kept out of it that's considered proprietary to the charities that you don't get. Except for California, states publish the Form 90s but do not include sensitive data included in the 990s, which include list of donors. Here in California, list of donors are released. And therefore, many organizations are reluctant to do charitable gifting in California, and they don't solicit in California. Now, you can give to the charity, which is out of state, but you cannot. They cannot solicit here, and that's where advisor donors is a good way of getting it to those charities also. Solicitations within the state. A solicitation is interpreted very broadly. Is any request for contribution through any medium. It can be TV, radio, internet, and of course, how do you keep it out of a state if you're on the internet? If you solicit or conduct business in the state, it may need to register with one or more state or local offices, and it's becoming more so that there's more offices you have to coordinate with if you're a charity, and of course that drives up the administrative expense of charities. People are always complaining the overhead of charities are too high, and yet the state creates more need for it. The organization also needs to renew its status annually with each affected state, file tax returns, and or file online data in addition to tax returns in many cases. Exemptions offered by some states. Exemptions often apply to religious organizations that have raised less than a certain amount of donations in the state. In other words, if your organization does de minimis nominal work in the state as far as solicitation, they don't go after you. Again, some do any type of solicitation in the state. If you're not exempt and fail to file annual compliance, it can result in very stiff penalties, much greater than I was surprised at. And I don't want to list them because the penalties seem to go up and down each year. So if I gave you one today, it's not going to be true next year, and it wasn't true the year before. So you have to look at what is for this specific year. Those state laws and regulations are part of the due diligence for financial planners working with private foundations. And a lot of financial planners do work with private foundations and people setting up private operating foundations. You have to check out what the impact of what state you're dealing in. And I think that was a surprise to me more than anything else when talking to the various experts in the field that do a lot more of it because they did it full-time basis or close to full-time basis as to mine as part of my responsibilities to my clients. Sales and use taxes are generally the same as for commercial companies. Charities buy and sell items subject to these rules, which again adds to the overhead and administrative cost. If organization has income from activities unrelated to their exempt purposes, called UBTI, a 990T is required, and UBTI also means the state will impose tax filing and taxes on the charity. Again, that's the overhead of the charities. Summary, and we found out the growing impact of state and local governments in this area of charitable organizations that impact the charities and indirectly affect the use of the funds that your clients are giving to the charities. Also affects your fiduciary responsibilities to check out states, etc., and where your clients' gifts will be going. And if you work with the foundation, you need to check out the states. The states and local government have entirely different tax rules, including income tax, than the federal government. And so don't assume anything the federal government does in regulations or taxes is going to be applicable to the state. The state governments can and do release sensitive data from the charitable tax returns, including donor lists. So you may not want to be, for example, in California and have the list of your donors listed for public domain. And with that, I wish you the best of luck.